Hi, my name is Kunal, and welcome to the Geeks of the Valley podcast, which connects with some of the brightest minds globally who are leading their respective industries today to discuss the hottest upcoming industry trends and how their work is affecting the global economy. This morning, from the New York City area, we have the most photographed trader and most iconic stockbroker on Wall Street's New York Stock Exchange, joining us today. Please welcome the Einstein of Wall Street, Peter Tuchman. Peter, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And how are things in New York City in light of COVID?
You know what? It's kind of odd. New York is such an amazing place with all different kinds of people in different neighborhoods and whatnot. And I have to admit, it's sort of, I've lived here my whole life. And we're starting to hear the ambulances again. We're starting to see the people lined up at City MD. So I mean, I got COVID. I was very ill for 3 months back in March. And so that was sort of the dark days of New York. And we were able to level off the numbers back then. But, once we see things spiking, the city is sort of going more into a bit of a lockdown. You've got one or two restaurants and, every few blocks, you've got most of the stores are boarded up. It doesn't feel like life as normal as it isn't for anyone else. But, New York is strong. We are tough and we'll get through it. But for now, it's a disconcerting feeling. It's unpleasant. And we can definitely feel like we're in the heart of a problem here. So that's New York for today.
First of all, sorry to hear that you caught COVID, and of course I can feel your pain. I think a lot of people across the United States are, in a very similar position. Let's jump into the first question, shall we?
Sure. Look forward to it.
So, Peter, tell me about yourself and your background and how it led you to the path of becoming a top Wall Street stockbroker on the NYSE for the last 25 plus years.
Great question. Super excited to answer it. My journey has been a wild one, I would say. I grew up in New York City. My parents are European. They were Holocaust survivors, came to the States in 1949. I grew up in New York City. It's where I've lived my whole life. Was fortunate to have a privileged background in that I had two really strong, loving parents and a brother and a really strong traditional family, which really gave me a good base to go on and live the crazy wild life I've led. I got a college degree in international business and economics, as well as a degree in plant and soil science. My first dream was to become a farmer or to do some kind of genetic work in the farming industry, and that was not my calling. I spent a year in Israel studying those things, came back to the States, went to college, got a degree in economics and business. And then I came back to New York and I started trading commodities. I was 23 years old and I had another dream that was to become a music business entrepreneur. And I opened up a record store in New York City, Bleecker Street in the West Village. And I started managing jazz bands. And that sort of took me on a trip around the world as I became a promoter of jazz concerts throughout Scandinavia, throughout Holland and France. I had a record business here in New York City and a record store, which was a gallery for African art, for jazz art. We had a store that was really kind of cool. It was modeled after European record shops where you could come in and listen to the records before you bought them. All the jazz artists of New York City used to hang out there. So it was an incredible part of my life that I enjoyed really well. But unfortunately at the time, it wasn't the time for that kind of a business. So in 1981, I shut that down, 1982, I believe. And I went to live in West Africa. I had a friend who ran an oil company in West Africa. And I was sort of, at one of my wild and crazy stages as a youngster. And it was time for me to, take a little geographic break. So I went to the People's Republic of Benin, which used to be called Dahomey. It's in the West African coast near Togo and Ghana and Nigeria. And I worked as an accountant and a computer specialist for Saga Petroleum, a Norwegian oil company there for a year and a half. I shut down that part of my life in mid-May of 1985. I came back to the States, realized it was time to sort of get focused on a career for my future. And my father had a patient who was the owner of was a partner in a large brokerage firm on Wall Street. And as it is with Wall Street, it doesn't really matter who you are or who you know. In order to work on the floor of the stock exchange, you got to kind of have to start at the bottom and work your way up, right? There are jobs that there's training for, you know, to be a portfolio manager or a trader up on a desk or an investment banker. These are the people who had, you know, college educations in business, got masters in business, and went on to work upstairs on trading desks. However, the job that I ended up getting, which turned out to be the beginning of my illustrious, wonderful career, was on the floor of the stock exchange, which is an extraordinary place in its own right, right? So the floor of the stock exchange is often called the street, right, is where the actual trading execution of stock happens. And traditionally, the people who are on the floor of the stock exchange were more sort of adrenaline junkies, people whose families had been in the business, people who thought quick on their feet, were good with numbers, good with people, and basically were not your sort of master's degree, you know, a little bit more prissy, upstairs kind of people. They were people who really could get into the thick of it and the down and dirty and scream and yell, what we call open outcry, and be really thinking fast on their feet. So my first job I ended up having, and which I started on May 23rd, 1985, was as a teletypist for Cowen and Company on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. I knew the minute I had arrived down there with the excitement and the people and the high energy and the adrenaline and the wild chaos, which turned out to be things that I thrived on, turned out to basically, I realized it very, very quickly that I had really found a career that I loved. I didn't know where it would lead me, but I knew that the floor of the stock exchange was a place I really wanted to be. And that became my career. You know, I ended up in September of that year, I requested after my summer internship to get a job at Cowen and Company, and they hired me. I was a quick thinker. I was good with people. I great with numbers, and I thrived off that kind of atmosphere. Some people don't. Some people need a coffee and a donut and a newspaper to get themselves going in the morning, and that was not me. I'm somebody, when the bell rings, I'm off, I'm going, and I thrive off the chaos and the adrenaline. So it was really a match made in heaven. I stayed at Cowen and Company as a option clerk, as a retail clerk, as an institutional clerk. These are sort of the stairways that you have to go on in order to learn to become a broker, which is everyone's goal when they get to the floor of the stock exchange, is to be once at one time in their career to become a trader and a broker and have a seat on the stock exchange. And that was, in fact, my goal. I was super lucky that it was a place where I could thrive. People liked me. I was good at what I did. And I ended up getting a seat on the stock exchange, which is a huge honor, especially back in the day. There had been 1,654 seats on the stock exchange established in the early 1903, and they never changed the amount of seats there were. And to become a broker was a huge, huge honor. So in 1988, after the crash of 87, I was in the right place at the right time. A number of people had sort of moved to other jobs. A person had quit, somebody retired, and I was lucky enough to be picked by Cowen and Company to get a seat on the stock exchange. I believe it was April 18th, 1988. And that was the beginning of my career. And, you know, though I didn't stay at Cowen and Company, and I've worked at many other firms along the way, I've been on my own, I've done convertible arbitrage, I've traded regular equities. That began my 35-year career on the floor of the stock exchange. And it's what I often say is, if you find something you love to do, you'll never work a day in your life. And that truly has been my experience on the floor. It's a place, one of the only places on earth in finance where the humans are still there, the human element as far as judgment and decision making is still done, and the connection of the people down there, the friendships that we've made and the business decisions that we've made. It is truly, for me, one of the greatest places on earth, for sure the greatest financial institution in the world, but it became a home for me. It became a place that I love to go to, and I've been there for 35 years since.
Wow, Peter, what a fascinating background, right? From a musician to an account executive in Africa to an NYSE stock trader. Some of the questions, listeners would have out there would be, when the 2007-2008 financial crisis hit, what was it like being on the trading floor at that time? What were some of the major market movements you saw? And when do you maybe potentially see the next financial crisis hitting?
Okay, so let's examine why there was a financial crisis in 2007, 2008. Let's look into sort of the nooks and crannies of the problem which caused it, because it was a very fascinating experience. So a lot of the large financial institutions, banks, lenders, started to lend money to people who really couldn't afford the money they were borrowing to buy houses. And what ended up happening was, it was sort of a curious, it's a very, very long story to figure out why, who decided to do this, why it was being done, whether it was premeditated in a lot of ways. There are a lot of different opinions around it. I'd rather give you the sort of the non-partisan, experience that I experienced in the problem with the mortgage. It was really a mortgage crisis that led to a financial crisis. So if you can imagine that you've got, so look, banks lent. I'll give you the bottom line hardcore story is that the banks started lending money to people to buy houses who could not afford the mortgage payments. And they did it in size. Okay, they started selling mortgages to people who did not have the money to afford it. And then what they would end up doing is when they would get a package of mortgages, right? And they decided to repackage them. Okay, so these were all loans, right, to individuals to rent and buy houses, right? And then they would repackage these big mortgage groupings that they had, put them in a nice box with a bow, and sell that debt to other institutions. And what ended up happening was there were way too many mortgages out on people who couldn't afford it. They repackaged them in such a way and resold them down the line, along this daisy train, to the point where by the time people started defaulting on their mortgages, that no one could really identify where these things were coming from, who was responsible. At the same time, you had a lot of the big brokerage firms betting against these mortgages, betting against the market, credit default swaps, right? So you had a lot of bad actors who were thinking that they had come up with this great idea to make money and look good with their firms, when in fact what they were doing was predatory lending. Predatory lending is lending money to people who couldn't afford to pay it back, and doing it in the millions of dollars, and then repackaging it, selling it to other financial institutions as bad debt, and they would sort of hide it and put it on their balance sheet. What ended up happening was when the bricks just started to fall out of the building, you started seeing a run on the banks. You started seeing failing banks and failing brokerage firms. And that's what ended up happening. So you ended up having to go to the Federal Reserve with these huge brokerage firms, huge lending firms, and huge banks saying, oh my God, people are defaulting like crazy. We are in deep trouble, and we really don't know where the end all of this is. What's the backstop of all this money that was lent, all this money that will not get paid back, and we are now in deep trouble. We have millions and millions of dollars of bad debt on our books, and we're in trouble. So they got themselves in the trouble on their own. Being greedy, particularly, is in my opinion, what ended up happening. So you just started seeing the pillars of financial institutions and lending firms and brokerage firms just starting to crumble, right? You saw Lehman go under, and then they called in the Federal Reserve to try and help them. And there was sort of a vying for position with the big houses. Some merged, some took each other over, as it were, to help buy out some other of their bad debt. Some of them went under and literally went bankrupt. Lehman Brothers, 25,000 plus people were laid off, right? And so that was the beginning of a situation where you ended up having to bail out AIG, you had to bail out General Motors, you had to bail out brokerage firms, you had to bail out banks. And that was the Federal Reserve pumping liquidity into the market. And, you know, it turned out to go from a mortgage crisis to a financial crisis. And a financial crisis ended up getting stopped out by the Federal Reserve. Kind of similar in a similar way to what we see today. But that was the financial crisis of 07, 08. And it took a decade or more to really, for us, the banks, the institutions, to crawl their way out of that situation. Tens of thousands of people lost their jobs. You know, pillars of the industry went out of business. And it really was a real dark mark on the financial industry, because basically once they sort of looked into the nooks and crannies of what really happened, it was a bunch of predatory lenders who went out on a limb, they repackaged bad debt, and they ended up screwing everybody over. That's the financial crisis of 07, 08. What was the second? The second part of your question is, do we think that we could see this happen again? Or what is my view on the other crises that we've seen? So we saw a crash in 1987 that was not caused by the same thing, but surely was a fast and furious major sell-off that once again, that, you know, there was a run on some money, people got scared. It was the largest percentage drop in history of the market. And what happens is that, you know, the individual retail investor seeing markets tumble like that gets scared and starts selling. When that's selling, it starts a cascade of more selling. And, you know, I guess and that's where you end up with these crises. You asked, is it possible that there will be another financial crisis? Well, what we have now in our world right now is a health crisis. And that health crisis has led to a financial crisis. So what you had on February 12th of 2020 was a market hitting record highs in an incredible, beautiful, from bottom left to upper right graph since the financial crisis and the bailouts until February 12, 2020, taking into account Obama's economic policy, Mr. Trump's lowering taxes, corporate taxes, and regulations. You saw a market hit a record high across the board, whether it was the Dow, the S&P, the NASDAQ, the Russell. Unemployment, the consumer was in robust condition. The bank's balance sheets were super strong. And the markets were at record highs. You then see a pandemic, which is we've never seen before, surely not in our lifetime, start in China. And as it came through the Middle East and in Europe, and people started to die, and we saw the incredible economic implications of sheltering in place and economic shutdown, we had over those 6 weeks from February 12th until March 23rd, the market once again crashed. The market was down 10,000 plus points on the Dow, double-digit percentage losses on the S&P. You know, what caused this? Well, the reality of the economic situation coming to a complete standstill, of a pandemic where not a soul on this earth was going to be unaffected by this. The scorched earth of the shelter in place, the economic shutdown, whether it's the gaming industry, the hospitality industry, movie theaters, our lives had changed forever. People weren't getting on planes. People were dying. You know, we were locked in place. And so you basically had a market that had sort of suddenly comprehended the incredible grandiosity and madness that we were living in this pandemic of the COVID virus. And so what you saw over a very short period of time, and there are some small conspiracy theories also that, you know, Mr. Trump knew about how bad the virus was in early February. He gave a heads up to people in the Senate, some of the hedge fund guys, and these people started selling stocks, and it caused the cascade that was fast and furious, a 10,000 plus point sell-off. And as, you know, people started seeing the market confidence and structure get eroded, well, then everybody jumped on board, and we saw the market sell off double digits across the board from February 12th to March 23rd. And so there's another crash. You know what? Crashes are curious. Crashes are really a stampede of people with fear, anxiety, and unknowns. Markets can accept any crisis, no matter what they are, and can even themselves out, as we're seeing once again, even with this crisis. But we've seen in the last 7 months a crash. We've seen days that have been mini crashes in a way, where we had 2,000 point sell-offs, 1,000 point sell-offs. In the big picture, these are not that significant, but they are. Financial crises and crashes are a function of people's fear and anxiety about the money they have, money they're going to lose, and whatnot. And so, yes, they can have it. The market has rebounded incredibly. Once again, as we saw in 07, 08, where the Federal Reserve steps in, offers liquidity and bailouts to small business, to individuals, to banks. And basically, the market has rebounded incredibly off of the lows of March 23rd. However, what's different about this situation is the economy is not rebounded. Although we're seeing some employment numbers that seem positive, and we are getting some vaccine numbers and things that look positive, at the end of the day, the virus is spiking way beyond our ever imagination. And we are going to be getting more shelter in place and lockdowns. And it will be a long time before people get on planes and go to theme parks once again, and movie theaters and whatnot, and go to see sporting events. So while the market has been strong due to liquidity and stimulus pumped in by the Federal Reserve, we are now at the crossroads of where the market, today particularly, we saw a rotation out of the reopening stocks and back into the stay-at-home stocks because the virus is spiking. We're seeing rotations in money as people posture themselves for what could be coming up as once again, a major health crisis, and in turn, an economic crisis. So we're as you and I are speaking here today on after the election of 2020 and the first week of November has gone by, we do see a fragile market. We have companies that are hard to give guidance of what the future will bring. We have a virus that is spiking. So we could be seeing another financial crisis. We are seeing a health crisis, an economic crisis, but yet the market is not really responding to it because of all the stimulus and liquidity pumped in by the Federal Reserve. This is not to say that this market could once again crash, depending on how bad this new third wave of the virus is, and that is a story yet to come.
So a lot of quantitative easing going on here, right? To some extent.
No question about it.
I want to go back to a point you had mentioned about the financial crisis. I think it's very similar to a game of Jenga, right? Where each block in the game is a representation of an investment grade of a certain bond, right? Whether it's AAA, BBB plus, AA plus, right? And when one of these blocks are pulled out, the whole tower comes toppling down. And it's a perfect representation on how these bonds were repackaged multiple times to represent a higher investment grade.
When they were just repackaging bad debt in fancy boxes.
Well said, Peter.
I'm going to take a position in something on the long side or the short side. So, I'm an old school guy. I prefer to do it the old way. I've tried to fight the system. It doesn't work.
So one of the transitions I want to make here is, as a stockbroker, right, when looking at the 4 trading techniques, or the 4 most commonly used trading techniques, such as swing, day, position, and scalping, how does that kind of align with your personal trading philosophy?
Okay, so you need to know that I've never owned a share of stock in my life. Okay, and that's a fact. That's just to give you the basis. So what I do is, I don't trade my own money. I trade other people's money. I work in a company that has a number of customers from the buy side and the sell side of the industry. I, right now, am doing business for a hedge fund and a prop trading desk coming out of Texas. So basically, I'm not a stock picker. I'm not a financial advisor. I am the broker at the other end of the phone as the conduit of the point of execution between buyers and sellers. So, my expertise is really kind of reading the tea leaves in a way where the decisions to buy and sell stock are being made around a business model that I've built along with a number of other people to trade the opening of the markets and the close of the markets, right? Markets open at a certain price depending on the buy and sell interest from the public. right? Markets now trade 24 hours around the clock. So by the time we reopen on a daily basis in the New York Stock Exchange in the morning, which to this date is still the most powerful and meaningful place to trade in the world, I am there to look for discrepancies in morning openings at the stock exchange, discrepancies where the market may be trading differently away than where it's going to open in New York Stock Exchange. And then one of the other business models is called market on close trading, right? So people put in their interest through different electronic systems, which is how we trade now, that end up coming down to my handheld, okay? And I'm able to see how much stock there is to buy and sell at any given time for an opening or a close. This is not inside information, it's information. Everyone who's down on the floor has access to it. It's a matter of how do you interpret the information. So I am also an educator. I'm here to teach young people how to trade. But what I do is I'm trying to take a career that I've had and an industry that I love and make it attractive to other people. I'm a firm believer that if you find something you love to do, you'll never work a day in your life. And within finances, within trading, and within the floor of the stock exchange, between the branding and the marketing and the stocks that are listed there since 1903, there's so many things that young people, middle-aged people, old people can find super interesting. And that's what I try and open doors that I've seen through my experience and that others may not see. All that being said, we're living in an incredibly volatile time. Since COVID, and in fact, since Mr. Trump has been in office, the market has barely had a day where it didn't move at least 1 or 2% intraday, right? So that's called volatility, right? So what does that mean? So that means that, you did touch on technical analysis. So you asked me the question, where are my interests lie, and what would I tell people the best way to trade this market is? And I would say what you said, which is you have to find your home in technical analysis. What goes on in a market today is, with social media and with algorithms, is that there are, when you have a president of the United States tweeting news about a China trade deal, about a problem with North Korea, about a situation with Brexit, the computers and the algorithms read the keywords in these tweets, and the market can actually be engaged by a computer 100%. And what you end up having is markets that move up and down absolutely irrationally based on that kind of information, okay? We saw it happen when Mr. Trump gave money to Eastman Kodak, and the news came out that they were being given $3 billion to find a vaccine. And the stock that had been basically dead in the water for years, was trading at $2 a share, suddenly went to $60. And I'm sure that the inexperienced trader looking at that, hearing this news and seeing the stock go from $2 to $60, presumed that must be a great buy because there's news out and everybody's buying it. However, these are dangerous traps that the market leaves us with. We've seen it over since the pandemic too, with drug companies that are working on a virus that come out with some news that appears to be positive. Everybody jumps on board. And then at the end of the day, even with Pfizer the other day, Pfizer's very positive news about a vaccine, the stock traded up to 41.90, which is the highest it's been in, I don't even know how many years. And if you had an unweathered trader or a young person just getting into the market, it turned out that Robinhood, one of the trading apps, said that they had an 84% increase, in people getting into Pfizer on that day. Well, Pfizer ran from $33 to $41.90. People jumped in thinking that that was it. It's going to go higher and it's all beautiful and good. However, it turned out that that day was the high of Pfizer, and Pfizer has now retraced itself to $37. I'm saying all this to say that while people think this can be a get rich fast scheme, it's not. Some people think it's gambling, and it's not. It's a matter of probability. One needs to avail themselves of all the educational, technical analysis tools in order to trade a market, especially a market like this one that is so volatile. I often say hope is not a strategy in stock trading, right? You can't buy something for the wrong reason, thinking it's the right reason, and hope that it goes up, because that is a guaranteed formula for losing all your money. So if I can say anything as an educator in the technical analysis space, that learn the fundamentals of technical analysis, right? Learn about moving averages, learn about double bottoms and double tops, learn about candlesticks, learn about the things that make stocks move. It may be all fun and fancy and attractive to be involved in stocks that Warren Buffett just got buying, or some big hedge guy finished buying. When these people are done buying it and they tell the world about it, it's not the time to jump into it, because they're done buying it. So there is a fool's game here. And, unfortunately, it's one of the reasons I've tried to get into the education space for stock trading, is because there are so many do's and so many don'ts. And the bottom line at the end of the day, in the market as it is today, which is so insanely volatile, with the pandemic, with stay-at-home stocks, with reopening stocks, with airlines, with gaming, with the drug companies that are coming out with vaccines. I mean, it is unbelievable. The Pelotons of the day, and the Wayfarers of the day, and the car companies. At the end of the day, all of this news and all of these headlines are dangerous inroads into trading stocks. However, what we've found and reiterate on a daily basis now is that it doesn't matter how crazy and volatile the market is. Fundamental technical analysis works more times than it doesn't. And we're talking a probability game here. So it's super important. There are a lot of, I've curated a really cool day trading course with a gentleman I've known for 35 years. It's called the Green Room Live. He teaches people how to trade technical analysis, right? How to do daily moving averages, 50-day, 200-day. How to look at double bottoms, double tops. Do swing trading. Do option tradings when you feel that something's got a long-term positivity to it. So I can't emphasize enough that to get into this game without knowing the rules, and to think that you can trade off of headlines and whatnot, is a dangerous game, because unfortunately a majority of people who start to trade and don't know what they're doing lose their money, and then they just take their ball and leave the playground. When if you were to take the time to learn the fundamentals of technical analysis, this could be an exciting career for you. It could be something to make some extra disposable income. It could be the inroads into marketing and branding and whatnot, with all the incredible companies that are IPO'd on the floor of the stock exchange, whether it's the Ubers and the Lyfts, whether it's the Pelotons, whether it's the Snapchats, whether it's the Shake Shacks of the world. There's so many things to find interest in on the floor of the stock exchange, right? People come to me and say, well, I don't really know much about the market and law. And I say to them, yes, you do. You're a consumer, right? You buy the next iPhone. You buy the next Nikes. You buy the next, Apple notebook. You're a participant in all this. You're on Facebook. You're on Amazon. These are things that you're involved everyday life with, and they're public companies. So if you notice that everybody's buying stuff on Amazon, e-commerce is taking off, well, that's the kind of information you want to know to get involved in the market. So, you know what? I really think that people need to educate themselves on it. This can be a way for you to spend a couple hours a day trading the market if you want to be a day trader. Perhaps you want to be a trader as a career, or an investment banker, or whatever. There's so many things to be interested in the nooks and crannies of the companies that are public and traded in the New York Stock Exchange, that it's a whole world unto itself. And I spend my life's goal is to open doors and minds to all the wonders of the New York Stock Exchange.
So speaking of trading, you've been known to show emotional expressions of anticipation, desperation, and triumph on Wall Street, particularly on days of market volatility, right? And as a stockbroker, how do you deal with frustration, self-doubt, and other emotional aspects of trading What is your daily process like?
So my daily process is very. I have a routine, right? So you're right. Look, people have seen my facial expressions, some of glee, some of horror, some of desperation, some of concern, some of upsetment. Right at the end of the day, as I said once before to you, I've never traded a stock, so I'm not in the market worrying about my 401k or my personal portfolio because I've never had one. Okay. So my mind is based on being the conduit for my customers. I'm a customer man. That's what I do. I want my customers to be happy. I need to do things in the best fiduciary way to protect them. So I am at the point of sale, right? I'm the guy who goes into the farmer's market and is given an order to buy, heirloom tomatoes for the tomato salad at Le Bernardin, the fanciest restaurant in New York. And I'm the guy who's the eyes and ears when I go to the farmer's market to buy those tomatoes and I look at them and they look like they're rotten. I call the chef up and go, you know what? You may have tomatoes on the menu, but it's a bad idea, right? They're not looking good today. And he'll go, great, let's pivot, Pete. Go buy me some mesclun salad. So I'm the point of interest when my customers decide through a lot of analysis and hard work what stocks they want to buy and they sell. I'm the guy who goes down there and basically is the eyes and ears for them in the crowd, giving them input about how fast we should be buying it, how aggressively we should be buying it, whether we should be buying it at all or not. And they don't have to listen to me, and I can't decide for them what to do. But I can be down there to curate their experience in the buying and selling of stocks. You asked me about the pictures that are taken of my facial expressions. And I think it's super important to note, first of all, none of them are posed. And secondly, as a broker on the floor of the exchange, representing hedge funds that have $400-500 million under management and prop traders who are trading, trying to make some money on a daily basis, right? My frustration and my glee comes from my ability to do the right thing by them, right? So, while I can't control what the market does, my decision-making is done with a lot of hard work, as is theirs. And when I commit other people's money to a trade, I feel very personally responsible for it. So much so that I've never owned a share of stock in my life. Because if I was worrying about my own P&L, I would less be worried about what the customer's doing, right? So there's a certain integrity that I feel very strongly about, which is why I never owned a share of stock in my life, that when I'm at work, when I'm on the floor for 8 hours a day, and I'm trading other people's money, whether it's 10 million or $250 million on a daily basis, how my execution comes out is I take very personally. So when you see me really gleefully, the market's cooperating with whatever plan we had for the day, posturing, whether we are long the market or short the market, whether we bought the market or sold the market. So when you see that glee, it's the market cooperated. We were buyers of the market and it went up. And sometimes when we were buyers of the market and it goes down, you'll see those, I'm holding my head in my hand and I'm very upset. So I take personally the relationship that I have with my customers, the relationship I have with executing and doing the best job for them. It's like if I was a doctor and I had a patient who had cancer and I was able to cure that cancer, then there'll be glee and excitement, not to actually, to compare money and illness. But the bottom line is, as a professional in the industry I am, if I'm able to do the right thing and the market cooperates with my people on a daily basis, you will see excitement. And if it doesn't, you will see upsetment.
Now I want to change the conversation to algorithmic trading. And, today you're not just seeing the more sophisticated asset managers, but a broader set of users that are interested in using algorithmic trading, right? Primarily because it reduces market impact and it is a very quantifiable approach to the marketplace, right?
Yep.
What would be your advice to self-taught traders who are looking to make a career in trading long-term?
Look, I was around before algorithms and before computers, and I was there for the open outcry with paper, buying and selling stocks in the millions and millions of shares. And, you know, as somebody who really yearns for that day again, I don't particularly, I'm not a fan of algorithms and computer trading at all. Okay, the basic, you do your homework, you find out what's going on with that sector and that particular stock, and you make a decision based on earnings, based on guidance, based on new products or whatever, and you decide to buy it as a long-term investment or a short-term investment. Okay. Then computers came along, and there was a speedier mode of trading. Back in the day when we did open outcry, our goal was to put on large prints of stock. You walked into the market maker, or what used to be called the specialist, and he says, what do you got? And I said, I'm a buyer. And he says, how much? And I say, I got 50,000 to buy. I want to be third of the volume. And another guy walks in, he says, I got 100,000 to buy. And then 3 sellers walk in, and they want to get aggressive because their customer had a feeling something negative was going on. And so the specialist, the market maker, would put us all together. He'd go, there's a buyer of 50, buyer of 100, 3 sellers, 100,000 each. Let's put on a print. A print would be to make sure that everyone is satisfied, and the market maker is there to facilitate this print. So the 3 sellers would sell 100,000 each. 1 buyer would buy 100, 1 buyer would buy 50, and the market maker will buy the other 150. And suddenly we put 300,000 shares on the table. That's the way trading's supposed to be done. That's the old school. Then you got computers involved. Then you got algorithms involved. And yes, I understand that people want to dampen the effect of them on the market per se, and that's why they use an algorithm that's 5%, 10%, passive, aggressive, stay on the bid, only go along. I mean, these are things that, you know, are the new way of trading. To me, they're not that exciting. You know, right now we used to go, an average trade on the stock exchange was 10,000 shares, right? Now in algorithmic trading, all you see trading is 100 shares. You don't really know where the buyers live. You don't know where the sellers live. So you're kind of trading blindly. And when you're trading blindly in an electronic market, you are afraid to actually make a stand. So algorithms were built so that you could participate in the market, right? Without knowing where the buyers and sellers live, which is key information. And you're just kind of no impact going along because you want to. I can surely give advice to a young person who is interested in day trading to make some extra money, get the fundamental technical analysis, learn it, get in touch with me. I'll set you up with a day trading course. If you're somebody who wants to get into the industry, you got to do your homework. Don't worry about the end all about algos and computers and trading that way. You need to understand numbers. You need to understand people. You need to understand sectors and industries. It's all the homework that gets you to actually hitting a button that sends your order out there with 5% go along passive, right, is the important stuff. So I don't like to talk about the electronic stuff and algorithms. They're there. They're here to stay. I have no control of them. I kind of think they're the wussy way to get involved in markets. I rather go out there. I got 100,000 to buy. I rather be there with the buyers and the sellers, and we talk and we kibitz a little bit, and we decide, you know, what do you know that you got more stock upstairs, I got stock downstairs, and we put together prints that are significant so that people know that there are people out there buying and selling stock. When you have this passive, low impact algorithm stuff, for me, it's ruined the industry in so many ways. But you know what? I can't fight Wall Street. That's what they've chosen to do. But I would rather people, you know, look in the nooks and crannies of all the different industries and sectors and stocks that we have on the stock exchange. There's so much branding and marketing, and, you know, companies now are doing, there's ESG, there's sustainable stuff. There are all kinds of the information highway to find out what these companies are really doing, what their prospects for the future is, you know, who they're merging with. The food industry, food business, an incredibly exciting business with mergers and acquisitions. Airlines in their own right, they're so complicated because of the price of oil, and now with the pandemic, no one's flying. The hospitality industry, restaurants. I mean, that's what I find exciting, right? I rather tell people to find something exciting in the nooks and crannies of these corporations and then start doing their homework, right? Not worrying about, because, you know, until you're actually a trader on a desk and hitting buttons, you don't have to deal with an algorithm, right? So there's a lot that people should learn before they get to that point. And that's more what I'd rather focus on.
So, Peter, there's this new asset class such as Bitcoin with a current market cap of just over $199 billion. And other digital assets have kind of really taken the traditional stock market by surprise. How do you see the current financial infrastructure potentially adapting and making digital assets a mainstream offering to both institutional and retail traders?
It's so funny that you asked me that question. If you had asked me that question a few days ago, I would have told you, look, I don't understand Bitcoin. I don't like to talk about it. And I just find it a bunch of hooey-dooey stuff up in the clouds. However, in the last couple of days, it's sort of spiked my interest. There are things I understand really well, and there are things I don't. I'm not an economist, as I said. I'm not a financial planner or advisor, and I'm not a stock picker. What I am is a forensic detective about why stocks do what they do on a daily basis and the markets. The new asset class of Bitcoin and the other cryptocurrencies, it never intrigued me, and it never really caught my fancy until recently. And it turns out, in fact, Federal Reserve Chairman Powell started talking about it today in his minute in the conference about how to integrate digital currencies into the stock market, into as an investment class and a way of transferring money. So it's spiked my interest recently because, look, the stock has gone, Bitcoin has gone from nothing to $20,000, and then back down to 2,000, and now up at 16,000. So those are dangerous moves. Those are volatile moves.
Peter, an interesting point that you bring up. To wrap up our call with our last question today, what piece of advice would you give to people out there from the journey you've had thus far in life?
I love the question. Thanks for having me for this interview altogether, and it's a great way to end it. So I have things that have become very important to me. I consider myself a young person. I've had a number of different careers, even though I've been on Wall Street for 35 years, as I described earlier in the journey it took me to get to Wall Street. And while on Wall Street, what has been the most intriguing and wonderful thing for me is that for a majority of the time, it's been a people place. It's been a place that involved the human element, right? And, my dad was a physician. He was a doctor. He was a diagnostician, right? He had survived 4 years in concentration camp, came to America to follow his dream, which was to be a doctor. And for him, humanism, right? The relationship of one person to another was the most important thing. His ability to diagnose a disease in another person came from obviously his medical training, but was basically he was able to take somebody's hand and have a connection, one person to another, was the most profound thing that he would talk about to me as a youngster. He lived to be 98 years old, wonderful guy, humanist. His motto was, clearly, it's not about, collecting toys, and the guy with the most toys when they die wins. It's a matter of that having a positive effect on other people's lives while we're here on this earth is the most profound and meaningful thing, right? So, this may feel a little, cushy-washy yoga karma stuff, but it's really important to me. And I think it's really important, especially as we find ourselves in the middle of a pandemic where we are isolated from other people and from our lives. What we found, from this, and having been on my own miserable, brutal journey for 8 months under COVID, is we find out what we really need, what we can live with and what we can't. We find out what we want. We find out what's really important. And, and it may feel a little fluffy, but, random acts of kindness, will keep you in the light. Relationships with another human being is super serious. This journey, while we seem pressured to be big consumers and buy the next right thing, the next big thing, and have to spend a lot of money and show off our fancy cars and our fancy trips and stuff, at the end of the day, it's not really that important. But, what we can do to make better someone else's life for me, I know it sort of seems counter to me being a Wall Street guy and a money guy and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, that's all horseshit, right? At the end of the day, it's super important, first of all, to find something you love to do, as I said before, because you'll never work a day in your life, is to treat other people as you would want them to treat you, with kindness and love, right? Is to educate yourself to the best of your ability. Nothing important comes to you quickly, right? It's a matter of learning the game. I'm a firm believer in being a team player. I know what I know. That's why when people ask me to do an interview, I will never let them tell me the questions in advance, because the stuff I know, my truth is my truth, and I won't ever forget it. And so when I answer a question I know the answer to, it just comes naturally. If I don't pretend to know it. But I want people to find value in family, in kindness, find something they love to do, search and search and search. It's not a matter of how many times you get knocked down. It's a matter of times how many times you get up, brush yourself off, and keep moving. So this journey can be ruthless for many people, right? Financially, emotionally, spiritually. It's not an easy game, right? Life. But these things that I'm talking about is search out where you never give up, first of all. Find people who are there to empower you, right? If somebody's ignoring you, let them go, okay? When somebody shows you who they are, believe them, right? And find your way through this journey to find something you love to do. Bring people who you love along with you for the ride, right? Find a career that gives your juices all they need to get up in the morning and not feel like you're going to work, because that can be a brutal, emotionally debilitating experience, to be doing something on a daily that you don't love, right? And just go out there and have some fun, and never take yourself too seriously, and never lose sight of the prize. The prize is, when we die, if we've had positive effect on other people in this world, then we've done our job, and that's the best we can do.
I guess to add to that, it also goes to show that you're born with nothing, and when you pass away, you also leave the world with nothing.
I agree with you 100%. Look, the bottom line is we start here. When we're born with nothing, we leave with nothing. It's a matter of what we do with the time that we're here to affect others and the world in a positive way that makes sense and really makes it all worth it. So I'm with you 100% on that.
Well said, Peter. For people who are interested in reaching out to you, what would be the best point of contact?
You know what? I think I'm very easily reachable through social media, whether it be LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. My Instagram name is Einstein of Wall Street. It's super easy. You DM me, I respond right away. I'm happy to share my experience with people. I'm happy to direct people who are wondering and who are having a constitutional crisis and need a little uplifting and empowerment. I'm always available.
Peter, it was a pleasure having you on Geeks of the Valley, and thank you so much for joining us.
All good things for Geeks of the Valley there, buddy boy.